Hi there. Now I want to take you back to a fairy tale that many of you will be familiar with from your childhood, Little Red Riding Hood. Now as children, we learn a lot from fairy tales, don't we? But some of them are dark and terrifying, like the Grimm brothers' version of this tale. It's a deeply bloody tale, fraught with violence and passion. For me, it's a story about womanhood, and by that, I mean menstruation. We're here in this dark forest of womanhood, surrounded by bloodshed and suffering. And although half of us have periods, they are still very much a taboo topic. So we're here with Red Riding Hood as she heads on up to Grandma's house because Grandma's ill. Her mother tells her not to stray from the path, but to go directly to Grandma's, taking gifts of cake and wine. But the wolf gets ahead of Red Riding Hood and tricks Grandma and devours her. This is me and my grandma. And it was the same with my grandma. She too was devoured by the wolf, suffering pain and bloodshed. Because Grandma had this awful condition whereby the cells that line the womb grow elsewhere, often in the pelvis, and bleed on a monthly basis, causing pain and inflammation, damaging organs and causing infertility. Grandma had endometriosis. She didn't know why sex was painful or why she was infertile because people didn't talk about it. And bizarrely, it was the same for me growing up as a young woman too. Now, my mum taught me that as a woman, I should expect to endure pain, and not just the pain of menstruation and sex, but ultimately the pain of childbirth. Now, I suppose there's a sort of Britishness about it, really, a stiff upper lip, a lie back and think of England. But before I realised that sex wasn't meant to be painful, I was already divorced. And that was... And that was despite growing up in a very open family where sex was discussed, and reading English at university where we discussed sex and phallic symbols almost every day. And there have been some really unusual solutions to this problem, like this red rubber buffer that stops deep penetration. Now, I'm not really sure how this would work. It's quite cumbersome. But it has made me think that if men suffered from the painful sex caused by endometriosis, maybe, just maybe, we'd have a cure for it by now. Now, this is the female pelvis. What a work of art. All these organs packed tightly into one small space. And a cross-section of them shows the uterus, the womb, in the middle, flanked on either side by the bladder at the front and the rectum, the bowel, at the back. And all these organs crammed into such a small space, perhaps it's wrong of us to think of endometriosis as purely a gynecological condition, because the cells can grow anywhere. I've met women with endometriosis on the lungs, or women who've lost a kidney as a result of it. And some gynecologists call it the benign cancer because of the way it behaves, these rogue cells implanting in places where they shouldn't be and bleeding, causing cysts and nodules. This isn't a disease that's life-threatening, but it's certainly life-devastating. Now, I'm an accountant, which is probably not something you should ever admit to. But I love statistics, don't you? They're great. And when it comes to endometriosis, there are loads of shocking statistics. This is common. We are talking 1 in 10 women. Yes, that's 1.5 million women alone in the UK. And 176 million women worldwide. There are as many women in the UK with endometriosis as with diabetes, and we've all heard of diabetes, haven't we? It takes an astonishingly long time to diagnose this. We are talking on average 7.5 years of suffering from initial symptoms to diagnosis. That's a long time for women to be suffering. You end up seeing loads of doctors. So for me, before I was diagnosed, I saw 2 gynecologists and a colorectal surgeon. And then afterwards, another gynecologist, another colorectal surgeon, 2 urologists, a pain management consultant, and a bunch of vascular consultants too. That's a lot of doctors. My first gynecologist told me that my problems were due to that well-known health problem, moving house. And it's pretty undignified, isn't it, really, seeing all those doctors and having lots of intimate procedures done. But actually, sometimes when you're having really serious things done, you end up thinking about the most bizarre things. So I was due to have part of my bowel removed, but I was really worried about how to keep things tidy down there in the pubic hair region. So I said to my brother, I don't know why I asked my brother, I said, what should I do about it? And he said, shave it all off, have a full Brazilian. And so I did. I've never seen my surgeon look so surprised. But seriously, you end up having so many surgeries. People would say to me, you're not having another one, are you? Like I was going on holiday or buying a new handbag. I've had 10 laparoscopic or keyhole surgeries in the last 10 years and a few other procedures besides. It just becomes a normal part of your life. So now is the part where I'm going to show us a short clip of my bowel surgery. So if you are squeamish, you may want to close your eyes for the next minute. Okay, is it going to work? So this is a surgery where the disease had affected my rectum, so I had it removed. And in the same operation, I had part of my bladder removed as well. But the wolf is vicious, and it came back in my bladder. So I had more bladder surgery and more bladder surgery. And it came back on the tube from my kidney to my bladder, the ureter. After that, I developed some really serious complications where my bladder kept rupturing. And I spent a lot of time living with one of these, a catheter bag. So that was pretty undignified too. Ultimately, I ended up medically retired at the age of 39. My boss said I was unemployable, and you can understand his point. In the last 10 years, I've missed nearly 4 years of work through having surgery, recovering from surgery, or recovering from complications. Would you want to employ someone with a sickness record like that? I don't think so. So it's probably no surprise that this disease costs the UK economy in excess of £10 billion per annum. And yet still, this hasn't been enough of an incentive to do something more about it. Now, a much more pleasant picture. Meet my fluffy uterus. Now, since Grandma's time, there have been some great advances in surgery, but still so many of us end up with female castration as a result, or a total hysterectomy. And when that time came for me, I wanted to celebrate it. So I had a bye-bye uterus party. And I invited my girlfriends round. We had pink champagne and cakes. It was a really joyous occasion. And a lovely friend of mine, a gynecologist, made me this fluffy uterus. I hope that the wolf has finally been slain and that I'm out of the dark forest. Now these are my huntsmen. Consultant gynecologist Andrew Kent on the right, and Professor Rockall, colorectal consultant, on the left. It was their hard work performing meticulous surgery which has made the difference. And I've learnt through having this disease and through being a charity trustee that sometimes you have to be prepared to climb a mountain in pink knickers to make a point. It shouldn't be like that. But it's going to take all of us, men and women alike, to make a difference so that our daughters don't have to go through this. I can't look the young women in my support groups in the eyes and tell them that it's going to be any better for them than it has been for us. I can't make that promise, but I can talk about it, and now so can you. It's a terribly unsexy disease. It's bloody, it's taboo, but it is there. And pretending it isn't is not going to help these young women one bit. So many women have endometriosis. There'll be some of you here in the audience today who have it, or maybe your wife does, or your daughter. You might not even know it yet. The wolf is devious like that. You can't tell from looking at someone's face. It takes a huntsman like my surgeon to track it down. Now, you've heard my story here today. It's no sweet fairy tale. Grandma and I were devoured by the wolf, as were all these women in this slide who were brave enough to send in their photos for this talk today. There is just one message. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about periods and break the taboo. Let's make knowledge of this condition our legacy and the hope that one day the wolf will be slain for good.